Hello, all. This is Douglas Bailey, and this is my data action plan. It's focusing on executive functioning data for my program at New Jersey Youth Corps for my students that are currently in cohort number 2. Thanks for watching. First and foremost, how would I manage and run the team meeting? I would definitely pull the team together after school, would try to make sure that all the students, of course, are outside of the building before we do this. I would use a PowerPoint or a Canva type of presentation. I would make sure that there is food available for staff after a long day. This is what I would do just in terms of just the beginnings. The team players, we're a very small staff of just 5. We have our director, we have our program coordinator, we have a transition coach, and we have 2 teachers, which include myself. What I would expect the team players to bring to the actual meeting, the director, first and foremost, can bring paperwork on the number of overall attritions that we've had thus far to start off the year, expectations of the state regarding successful completions, which are basically described as a student earning a high school equivalency and getting a job or entering into school. Successful completions can also include just a student getting a job, even if they don't earn the high school diploma, which is a little bit problematic for me, but I understand why the Department of Labor wanted to focus mainly on job readiness or school readiness. Direction of the budget for possible executive functioning disorder interventions. I wanted to know how much money would we have, if at all, to spend on helping us to conquer executive functioning disorders. From our program coordinator, I would like to see data on the number of incoming core members, how many have applied, how many did we accept, and were there any immediate observations during the assessment period when they first come in to take a small exam and go through an interview process? Was there anything that alerted our program coordinator to possible executive functioning disorders? And is there any IEP paperwork that we should be privy to that would possibly notate some executive functioning disorders? Next, from our career transitional coach, I would like to see job and school placements thus far for this current year, specific behaviors that he has observed that are counterproductive for student post-secondary success throughout his assessments and interviews and evaluations with students once they finish the academic side. And then from us as the educators, our observations on behavior and academic acumen. Are there social emotional learning issues leaking into the classroom? What does executive functioning have to do in terms of performance with students? Like, how much information do we have on that? And what are the weakest and strongest skills that we have seen from students thus far? These are just basic observations before we look at the actual data. So the agenda is to describe the 5 meeting process and what it will entail regarding New Jersey Youth Corps core members. In observations in class and the work site, we have all witnessed executive dysfunction in our students post-pandemic, and we're coming together for this data analysis meeting to talk about solution-based interventions. We did survey 16 students. We used a survey from Dr. Peg Dawson and Dr. Richard Guar to help us identify problematic areas of executive functioning. 8 male students, 7 female students, and 1 non-binary student were surveyed. Okay, so this is just an overall of the different things that will happen in each meeting. Meeting 1, review of the data, a survey, and overall observations from staff. Meeting 2, the triangulation of data. We're going to be looking at the student artifacts. We're going to be looking at teacher and staff observations and combining that with the data that we have in front of us. Meeting number 3, we're going to look at the gaps. How are students doing academically thus far? What do we observe on the work site as problematic? We're also going to get into the specifics of the executive functioning disorders that we see. We're going to identify the top 2 and then focus specifically on 1. And that's where meeting 4 comes in. Our action plan will be implemented. We have a number of different behavioral interventions that we've been researching. And of course, we want staff to also bring things to the table. I will be utilizing this particular presentation for our own program. So there is information that I've already kind of added but it is going to be open-ended, obviously, when you add other human beings. So I don't want to make this the end-all be-all in terms of the information, because I remember Dr. K said we don't have to put everything there, but I did want to have a little bit more meat on my skeleton because I do plan on using this. And then after 2 weeks with meeting 5, we're going to review. And I know 2 weeks doesn't seem like a lot of time, but our program only runs in 16-week intervals. So we don't have that September to June time period where we could, wait a little bit and try to evaluate over a longer period of time. So it's going to be 2 weeks, and then we're going to evaluate to see what changes have occurred. All right, so meeting 1, looking at the actual data from our surveys. You see we have our students listed here, and I want staff to pay close attention to what strikes them immediately. Like, what do they notice that the young ladies are struggling with? What is our non-binary student struggling with? What are our male students struggling with? So that's when that wonder and notice activity and ask activity come into place. File cards will be handed out to the staff, and they're going to look at the data, and we're going to talk about what we notice. What are our young men struggling with? What are our young ladies struggling with? What is our non-binary students struggling with? And how have these things played out in the classroom and the work site? These are just some examples of exploratory questions that can be asked. Obviously, these are my exploratory questions, but other staff members will put in their input. But how often, on average, are we redirecting certain behaviors? These are the types of questions that were developed as I was kind of noticing this dysfunction happening, particularly after the pandemic, and just saying, wow, what is going on here? Are these minor nuances, or are these signs of a more significant issue that can negatively impact core members in post-transitional phases? So this is extremely important for the progression of our program and also for the development of our students. Are the students self-aware of some of the challenges they are struggling with, and what are they willing to do, if at all, to change those things? And are they also seeing the same behaviors in both class and work settings? So other staff members will have their exploratory questions, but these are just some things that I'm thinking about that we can talk about during meeting number 1. Now that we have a little bit more of an understanding, meeting number 2, we can begin the triangulation of data. And I did provide an overview of triangulation on a YouTube page. It's a 3 to 4 minute video that will give the staff members an idea of exactly what we're looking at. But this is when we're going to take our artifacts, the student artifacts. What type of notes are they taking? What type of emails have they sent? What is the quality of their performance with their academics? Are they completing their study.com modules? How are they doing on their quizzes? We can even add other things in terms of, work performance. Are they able to come back from time? Are they able to come back on time from their break? Things like that. And then also we will add the teacher artifacts, our observations, our written observations, any corrections that we've made on assignments, any redirections we gave to them in terms of in the classroom behavior, any side conversations that we've had with them, either one-on-one or as a group, and addressing certain behaviors that we're not liking. For meeting number 3, we'll get into the actual learning gaps. We can use the executive functioning survey to determine the most significant weaknesses of the overall class. And then we'll create individual plans for each core member as they move closer into post-secondary transitioning. So we can see based on the chart that the number one issue the young men struggle with is stress tolerance, and the number one issue that the young women struggle with was working memory. So I want to pick one of those goals to start off with, and we're going to pick working memory, and then we're going to develop an action plan based on that executive function. Using the action plan, once again, from Drs. Peg Dawson and Dr. Rich Guar, we're going to establish interventions to help strengthen specific weaknesses and executive functioning. So there are 5 different learning gaps we can look at. We're going to get into that in 2 more slides. I wanted to provide a website that would give the rest of the staff an idea of how to identify learning gaps. What do learning gaps look like? But before we get there, let's take a look at what we are going to be identifying as the learning gap. That number one thing for this particular meeting is going to be working memory. So we have a definition of working memory here. We have our source here. And once again, this is what we're going to focus on trying to improve, because according to the survey, most of the young women in the class struggle with this. A couple of young men identified struggling with this as well. So this is what we're going to be looking at. Now, going back into those 5 learning gaps, right? They're extremely interconnected due to the structure of our program, because there's a work portion and there's an academic portion. So there's 5 core types of learning gaps: knowledge, skills, motivation, environmental, and communication. Now, according to Welcome, who's the author of this learning gap blog, having spoken with hundreds of teachers across the country during the last 18 months, many of these learning gaps educators had no control over. This is pandemic period. But 2 that stood out to the author most were knowledge and environmental gaps. And I do agree with that. That's something we have direct control over. So fortunately, thanks to doctors Peg Dawson and Richard Guar, their intervention action plan that is attached to the survey focuses on environmental and knowledge, aka academics. So they give us different things that we can do to help improve the environmental space and then the academic space. For example, working memory, we can have to-do lists for our students that either we post on the whiteboard or perhaps we email or text to them. We can also look at electronic applications that they can download on their phone to help them better retain information. And I also included a blog site so that the rest of the staff can start to look through potential apps. Quick note on this app is something that we would do today. We would look at potential task apps during this meeting and pick out a couple that we could play around with. So that way we can assign these and then we can look at the results of that during the evaluation period. We have the intervention steps, so we can establish our behavioral goal, okay? And we can see what environmental supports will be provided. So all those things are a checklist. And then, of course, this is all connected to what we call SMART goals. So for those that are unfamiliar with SMART goals, we have a YouTube link here as well. It's very important that we have a goal that's actually specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. And I think that this action plan definitely includes all the attributes of what SMART goals are all about. Some additional info to engage students. I find that one-on-one conversations are always good. So we can talk to them about some ways they can remember everything you have to bring home at the end of the day. And just talking to our students, letting them know this is not a secret. We need to work on executive functioning. So we're bringing them directly into this plan. This is not something that we're doing behind their back. We're letting them know, look, these are areas that you yourself had said that you struggled on. So we have to find solution-oriented things to help you conquer that. So they're going to be, they're fully engaged with what we have going on here. So after 2 weeks, once we select the applications, what has changed? They had 6 academic days and 4 community service days. How can we measure those benchmarks? Well, we have what's called our 2-week bi-weekly evaluations. It's a worksheet that we use to specify certain areas that we want students to work on. Our students receive stipends, bi-weekly stipends. So they get $100 a week for the work that they do. So we can always connect what they're doing to their stipend. For instance, if we're talking about working memory as being an issue, and we tell a student they got 20 minutes for a break, and they say, "Oh, I forgot. I went for a 30-minute break instead." We can deduct money out of their stipend for that. So there's ways that we can hold students accountable. The 100-hour test is after 100 hours of classroom instruction, we give the students the same test that they took when they came in for the original assessment to see if they went up any grade levels. So that will also give us a good evaluation on how our plan is working out for working memory. Behavioral observations, classroom participation, and of course, work site performance. Where do we go from there? We're going to move on to the next executive functioning that needs strengthening based on the results of this first one. So if the working memory interventions have not worked out the way that we thought that they would, we have to go back to the table and tweak some things, adjust some things. But if everything does work out and the majority of the students do show an improvement, we can move on to the next executive functioning that needs strengthening. Utilize the action plans from above or from the last slides, and also take suggestions from the staff. And then teachers and the transition coach can begin developing individual executive functioning strategies for each student based on their survey responses. But these will also include their strengths, because I feel like it's very important to let students know, although you have these weaknesses, you do have strengths, because I don't want everything to always be negative. All these things will be added to the student portfolio. Core members are highly involved throughout the process, and of course, understand the importance of strengthening executive functioning and post-secondary transitioning is the highest priority. We're a grant-funded program, so the data does count. What is called successful completion do count to the state. We service 50 students per year, so we have to make sure that students are A, earning a high school equivalency, and then B, having a successful placement, whether that be college, military, job, or trade school. The state will still recognize completion as successful if the student does not receive their high school equivalency, but are able to secure a post-secondary position. So that's another part of it as well. For the most part, we'll be able to evaluate and see immediately how much this is working, because we're with our students all the time, from 9 to 3 o'clock, whether we're in the classroom or whether I'm on the work site. I wear two different hats, as a supervisor and as a teacher. So we will be able to see the effects immediately on whether or not this is working. Teamwork makes the dream work. Without the staff working together, things will definitely fall through the cracks. Thank you for checking out my presentation. My references are listed below. This was my data action plan. Have a great day.